All right. So today we're moving on to 9.5. We're skipping 9.4. 9.4 was another way to solve quadratic equations, and it's by completing the square. We won't cover that section, so you don't need to worry about it for any upcoming tests. All right, so 9.5 is actually one of my favorite sections from everything that we learned this year. It's solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. So in class, I'm going to teach you a way to memorize it because this formula here does need to be memorized. To memorize it, I'm going to teach you how to sing the quadratic equation song. So tomorrow, come to class ready to learn that song, and I'll teach you how to memorize it. So today, I'm going to teach you how to use it. So in the notes, we'll learn how to use it, and then in class, I will teach you how to memorize it. Okay. So the real solutions. Remember, solutions for our quadratic equations are the same thing as the roots, the zeros, the answers, all those mean the same thing. We're always wanting to find where it crosses the x-axis. So we're looking for where it crosses here and where it crosses here. That hasn't changed from when we started graphing it. So remember, sometimes it has two answers, sometimes it has one answer when it only crossed at the vertex, and then sometimes it had no answers when it never crossed your x-axis. So all of those are still possibilities with our quadratic formula. So the discriminant is a fancy word for this part of the quadratic equation, and it's the part that's underneath your square root. So we'll use just the part that's underneath the square root to determine how many solutions there are. The whole equation then helps us actually find what those two solutions are. All right, so if the part underneath your square root, so b squared minus 4ac gives you a positive number, so it's bigger than 0, there are going to be two solutions, which means it crosses your graph x-axis in two places. If it's equal to 0, then that means there's only going to be one solution. It means it only crosses in one spot. And if you get a negative number, when it's less than 0, that means it's going to be one where it never crosses your x-axis at all. So if all we want to know is how many solutions there are, you just need to use the discriminant. If I want to know what those solutions actually are, so what the numbers are, not just how many there are, then I would use the entire quadratic formula. So we've learned several methods. We've learned factoring. This was a really straightforward way when it was easily factorable. But some equations weren't factorable. Didn't mean there was no solutions, means we couldn't factor. We learned how to graph it. This was great to visually help us see how many solutions there are. It's great when you're using a graphing calculator and when the numbers are exact whole number answers. It was less accurate, though, if it was an approximate answer, but sometimes an approximate answer is good enough. So downfall doesn't always give the exact solution. We can't always find the exact place. We learned using the square root method. That was the last section we did where we got x squared by itself. And then remember, we took the square root of both sides. Remember, this only worked if we did not have a b term. So if we have a b term, we couldn't use that method. We're not learning the completing the square, so you don't need to worry about that one. And then the last one we're using is the quadratic formula. This one will always work. So each of the other ones have a downfall. They don't always work. You couldn't always factor it. The graphing, you couldn't always get an exact answer. Using the square root, you can't use it when there's a b term. But quadratic formula will always work, and it will always give you an exact answer. The downfall is you have to take time to memorize it, and the calculations do take a little bit longer. But if you have a calculator, and once you have it memorized, you'll find that it actually is a pretty quick way to find all those solutions. All right, so we're going to start solving by using the quadratic formula. It says to round your answers to the nearest tenth if necessary. So we want to start by identifying what a, b, and c are. We've spent a lot of time practicing this. So my a term is the number in front of my x squared, which is 1. My b term is the number in front of my x term, which is negative 10. And my c term is the number by itself, which is 16. So I'm going to rewrite the quadratic formula so we've got it. So it's x is equal to the opposite of your b term plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. That whole side is divided by 2 times a. So now it's just a matter of doing that substitution. So x is equal to the opposite of my b term. Well, my b term is negative 10, so the opposite of that would be a positive 10. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Always put this number in parentheses. Minus 4 times my a term, which is 1, times my c term, which is 16. And make sure your square root goes over all of it. Divided by 2 times my a term. Okay. Now it's a matter of using your calculator to simplify it. So I get x is equal to 10 plus or minus the square root of, well, I need to simplify what's underneath there. Negative 10 squared means negative 10 times negative 10, which is 100. 4 times 16 is 64. So now I'll do 100 minus 64, which will give me 36. It's all divided by 2. So now here's why we have that plus minus sign. If you're wondering, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? So I can write that x is equal to 10 plus, what's the square root of 36? Well, that's 6 divided by 2. Or I can say that x is equal to 10 minus the square root of 36, which is 6 divided by 2. And why does it have a plus minus sign? Well, because we just learned in the last section, the square root of 36 is actually both 6 and negative 6. So 6 and negative 6. We have 2 equations. We'll get 2 answers because we had 2 possibilities for that square root answer. So it's all coming full circle. So now I just simplify it. So 10 plus 6 is 16. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Or 10 minus 6 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I've got 2 possible answers. If I were to look at the graph, those would be the 2 places where it intersects. All right. So let's do one more together, and then I'll have you try the next one by yourself. So again, start by identifying what A, B, and C are. So A is 1, B is 2, and C is negative 8. Now I'm substituting in. So x is equal to the opposite of my b. My b is 2, so it'd be a negative 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times my a term times my c term divided by 2 times my a term. All right, when I do that, 2 squared is 4. Negative 4 times negative 8 is a negative 32, and 4 plus 32 is 36. It's not always going to be 36 under there. It just happened to come out 2 times that we get the square root of 36. Okay, so now remember the square root of 36 has 2 possibilities. It could be a positive 6 or it could be a negative 6, which is why we have the plus minus sign. So I get x is equal to negative 2 plus 6 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Or I get x is equal to negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. 2 possibilities. All right, go ahead and try the next one, and then pause the video, come back, and check and see how you did after you finished it. All right, so I'm going to identify A, B, and C. And then I'll use my equation. So x is equal to the opposite of my b term. It was originally a negative 1, so I'll make it a positive 1. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times my a term times my c term, all over 2 times my a term. So I get x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of, well, 1 squared is 1. Negative 4 times 3 times negative 2. Let's see, 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 is 24. Negative times a negative is a positive. So I have 1 plus 24, which is 25. And dividing it by 6. So x is equal to 1 plus square root of 25 is 5 divided by 6. Or x is equal to 1 minus 5, because the square root of 25 is also a negative 5. And then I simplify each of them. So I get x is equal to 1 plus 5 is 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 1 minus 5 is a negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 6 can be reduced to negative 2/3. And there's my answers. Okay, if it just says determine the number of solutions, so it doesn't say find the solutions, it just says determine the number of solutions. We just need the discriminant. The discriminant was what was underneath your square root. What's underneath your square root is just b squared minus 4ac. And here's why. Because if what's underneath your square root is a positive number, we know when you take the square root of a positive number, you get 2 possibilities. But when you take the square root of 0, you just get 1 possibility. And when you take the square root of a negative number, you can't do that. So you know there's going to be no solutions. So identify what A, B, and C are. And then just find the discriminant. So b squared minus 4 times a times c. So 6 squared is 36. Negative 4 times negative 1 is 4, times 3 is 12. So I have 36 plus 12, which gives me a positive number, so I know there are going to be 2 solutions. Okay, try number 9. Tell me how many solutions there are going to be. So again, identify what A, B, and C are. So I have B squared minus 4 times A times C. So I have 36 minus 4 times 1 times 9 is 36. So I get 0. That means I'm going to be taking the square root of 0, which just gives me one possible answer. So there's only going to be one solution. Again, my answer isn't 0. I know there's just going to be one solution. And the last one, try this one and then pause it, check and see back how you did. All right, so my A term is 1, my B term is 3, and my C term is 8. So I have B squared minus 4 times my A times my C, which gives me 9 minus 4 times 8 is 32, which will give me negative 23. I can't take the square root of a negative number, which means there's going to be no real solution. All right. So the next section says find the number of x-intercepts of the graph. Hey, guess what? The number of x-intercepts is the exact same thing as the number of real solutions. So you're going to do everything exactly the same. The only difference is instead of it being equal to 0 is equal to y. So all you have to do is make y equal to 0, and then it's the exact same thing. So we won't take the time to work those. You just know that finding the x-intercepts means the same thing as find the solutions. Solve it when y equals 0. And if all we want to know is how many solutions there are, it's just a discriminant. All right, the last one says to solve using any method, but make sure and explain your choice. So go ahead and try these 3 problems using any of the methods we have learned. And then think about why you chose that method. Pause the video and come back when you've done all 3 of them. Okay, so number 14 isn't equal to 0, but I could simplify it by subtracting the 16 over, and I have x squared minus 4x minus 12 is equal to 0. My A term isn't 1, and when my A term isn't 1, it's usually a pretty easy one to factor. So I'm going to actually set up factoring this one. You could have chosen a different method. That's completely fine. So my A times my C goes on top and my B goes on bottom. 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 12 and add to give me negative 4 would be a negative 6 and a positive 2. Divide them by my A term. So I get x minus 6 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. Remember, you set each of them equal to 0 and solve them by our zero product property. So I get x is equal to 6 or x is equal to negative 2. If you use the quadratic formula, great. You should still get the exact same answers. On the next one, again, this one looks pretty easy to factor for me. So I'm going to try factoring it. So my A times my C goes on top, B goes on bottom. 2 numbers that multiply to give me the top and add to give me the bottom. And divide by my A term. So I get x minus 7 times x minus 1. Remember, zero product property says if 2 things are being multiplied together equal to 0, you can set each of them individually equal to 0 and solve. So I get x is equal to 7 or x is equal to 1. The last one, my A term is not 1, so I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So my A term is 3, B term is 1, C term is negative 5. So x is equal to the opposite of my B term plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. So x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of, well, let's see, 1, and then I have negative 4 times 3, which is negative 12, times negative 5, which is a positive 60. So this would be a 61 underneath there, divided by 6. So I get x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 61, divided by 6. I can't simplify square root of 61, so it is completely okay to leave your answer like that. However, if it says an approximate answer is okay, then we can approximate what the square root of 61 is. Approximately, square root of 61 is 7.81. So I can say that